Well, sorry. Good afternoon, everyone. So, so we're moving into VR and business. So we're looking at the enterprise side of VR, which is of great interest to me particularly because I work with a group of companies at Vertigo Labs, which is in the northeast, which is a network and a physical location. So that's kind of my intro, actually. So I'm going to move over to Jason Lovell.
Hello.
Is this working?
Yeah.
Hello. I'm Jason. I run a immersive consultancy called Captivate, and essentially what we try to do is help businesses understand how they use VR and AR. Kind of the mantra really is to kind of demystify it and get to the crux of how you can create real business benefit from using it. Work with a range of clients from different industries with varying degrees of success. And here I am.
And I'm Tanya. I own the company Digital Jam, and we work with lots of different people across different industries, but our primary focus is inclusivity and diversity of conversation. So we talk with just about every vertical when it comes to different technologies, including VR and AR.
Antonia Koop. I'm the managing director of Kite Rider Strategic Adventures, also known as Corncutter games. And we are using games technology to develop training programs, focusing on leadership development for senior managers on one hand, and on preparing people to operate in hostile environments on the other hand.
Right, great. So I'm going to launch straight into this panel by asking some questions, and then it would be really great if you could think of some questions as well. I don't know how many of you work on the kind of enterprise side, but there are a lot of games companies now that are looking at the enterprise or business side of VR. So, yeah, get thinking of those questions just in case you're interested. Anyway, so I'm going to start by asking what sectors you think are leading the way in utilising VR and how are they using it. So I will start with Antonia.
Well, we had a look around, and obviously we are looking at it from our own perspective, and came to the conclusion that there are some sectors who use it, who can hugely benefit from it, and some who are not so much benefiting from it, but use it. I think we'll talk about that more a bit later. We believe that one of the sectors that can take the lead and is already exploring taking the lead is education, because it can utilize the immediacy and the impact and the engagement and immersion of VR. So I think that's a very interesting sector to look at. At the moment, it looks as if most of the applications are actually in visualization. So any area where you need to visualize something that is complicated, complex, or that you want people to understand, visualize a design model or visualize something that is that you have to make tangible, like in medical. I've seen examples from molecular designs where they used VR to just play with it and see what can it do, and to just have a better grasp of the whole thing.
I suppose I was going to ask Jason as well, what sort of uses of VR have you seen in business that have kind of captured your imagination, or you think, are kind of leading the way?
I think it's really varied. I mean, when I started doing my consultancy, I had a kind of idea of the type of companies I'd liaise with, and honestly, it's far different to what I thought. There's a real range of companies that you wouldn't think VR would be applicable for. But it's really interesting to see, actually, when you sit down with these people, and they might have a perception of what VR is and what it means, but actually when you get to the stage where you're sitting down with their guys and you are really trying to elaborate what VR can do, then when you start getting their kind of creative juices flowing and they start thinking about how VR could benefit their business, it's incredible to see some of the ideas that come out of it. I think in the wider industry, what's really interested me is, especially like the automotive sector, the work that's been done there in terms of customer-facing work, so stuff you've seen from Audi and Jaguar Land Rover, but also the way that these guys are using it internally as well, so improving workflows. It's a real... It's interesting to see the companies that really embrace it. They're the ones that kind of look at it from both angles, away from just a pure marketing shout. Yeah. But also the healthcare sector, I think you touched on it. I mean, some of the stuff that's being done in healthcare in VR is just mind-blowing. How VR can actually be used to create real benefit for people, how it can actually alter your mind, how it can be used for pain treatment, PTSD, all this kind of stuff. That, for me, I find is fascinating.
Yeah. So how do businesses get in touch with these organisations? How easy or difficult is it for somebody who's working in VR to get in touch with, the healthcare professionals or, you know, trusts or also the automotive sector?
I think it's a bit of a minefield at the moment, because I think, you know, talk to me obviously, but I think at the moment you look at it, there is, for a lot of these people, when you go and talk to these businesses, they don't really know where to start. They get what VR is as a concept. They get kind of what it can do. They might have tried Vive or Gear VR. They've got a sort of high-level idea of what it is. But actually taking it from being this is fun, we're playing a bit of VR, it's new, to what can this actually do for me that creates benefits, like lasting benefits, away from a short, snackable bit of marketing content that people use and don't remember, or they'll remember for a while.
Yeah.
That's tough, because for a lot of these guys, it requires them to really understand what problems they need to have solved, and then work out how VR can solve those problems, because it can't solve every problem.
Yeah.
You know, some of these companies have been sold this dream of VR being a magic bullet for everything, and it's not. It really isn't, because we all seen bad VR, and bad VR is really bad. So it's one of those things where the effort needs to go into making sure that what they're creating is right for the platform.
Yeah.
Otherwise it's completely pointless.
Okay.
But that can be tough to get to that stage.
Right. So Tanya, have you seen any examples out there of VR that maybe shouldn't have been used for that particular objective or purpose?
Far too many to actually name them all here, because we only have half an hour. But actually what I want to do really, really quickly is just briefly go back to the previous questions.
Yeah.
And just reiterate that actually, in terms of people who are actually making money out of VR at the moment, because there's a lot of people asking about what industries are interesting and are interested in making VR, but very few who are actually actively making revenues out of VR. And there are two key industries that are, and we should be engaging with them as much as possible. The first being the defence industry, and anybody who's working in anything related to military will know that there is an entire subsector of the defence industries called synthetic worlds. Synthetic worlds is actually just a fancy phrase for them, for VR. And they've been doing that for the last 30 years, and they make a lot of money out of it. And that's not, you know, in just doing battlefield scenarios and hostile environments. It's in everything from logistics and transportation and, you know, manufacture of materials, and all sorts of different ways that they're looking at that. In the same way that with automotive, people think, oh, it's about, you know, having a consumer end thing in a showroom to be able to show you what car you're going to buy. Actually, the most interesting use of VR is in the manufacture end of this, in understanding the logistics of how to make your factory more efficient, how to make yourself more cost efficient with different types of materials. And these are the people who've been doing this for a very long time and making money out of it. So there are lots of different ways that you can be looking at engaging with this industry and doing that with other verticals who are already making revenues. And second of all, in terms of who can you get in touch with and reach out to in order to have that conversation, that bridge, there are already existing organisations for many of those verticals. So in the defence industries, the DSC, which is the Defence Solutions Centre, look it up, DSC, and then the DSTL, which is the Defence Science and Technology Lab, whose primary interest is in people exactly like you in this room. They are looking for people who are creating new patents, creating hardware and software and other technologies that don't currently sit within the defence industries, but have possible application within their industry. So it's an opportunity for additional lines of revenue and additional monetization that you aren't necessarily aware of. That's their whole purpose in life. They are there to talk to you and help you to bring your services into their industry.
Right, okay. Just interestingly enough, in the audience, who out there is working in VR and working with businesses as opposed to making games? Oh, that's quite a fair number, actually, in the audience. That's encouraging to see. All right, well, that's interesting. We'll try and find out what sectors you're all working in a minute. And then thinking about the defence industry, then, is it quite easy to get in touch with that organisation through that network?
Exactly. So, by show of hands, how many people here have heard of Digital Catapult, Immerse, Innovate UK? Any of these organisations, you've all heard of them, right? The DSC is basically the defence equivalent of these things. So they're totally open to conversation. They're there for you. They're government funded. They're there to facilitate and assist. And there's many, many different variations of these types of organisations that exist for each vertical. You just need to figure out who it is. So for automotive, for example, the DE&TC, which is based over in Stratford, which is the Digital Engineering and Test Centre, you know, their whole purpose is government spoke. They are there to facilitate a relationship between the games industry and the automotive industries. They actually are there to facilitate that relationship for you guys. it's there are all of these different organisations that are there for you.
All right then. So are we thinking that companies that are doing serious VR with businesses as opposed to entertainment or games, are they going to be making the bigger money? Are they going to be the people who make all the money in this sector?
Can I give my opinion on this? I'm going to give my opinion, which is there are so many people who are blinded by the dazzling lights of the possibility of the VR industry being focused on consumer. And it's like, lovely that you think that it's all about consumers, but realistically, let's be real, in the next 5 years or so, realistically, the people who will make money are going to be business to business. It's not about business to consumer. And sure, we'll get there eventually, and eventually we'll get enough content, and it's going to be good content, and there'll be enough users, and all the rest of that stuff. But if you're relying on an industry that is all about the amount of consumer headsets in the industry, or in the market, you've got a few years to wait, people. You should be focused on the opportunities here in regards to business, and there are huge opportunities. It's a vastly untapped area at the moment. There's a lot of people, to be fair, it's the blind leading the blind. Most of these people from outside our industry don't know what they're doing, and they're literally desperate to meet with people like us and be able to have these questions answered. So there's a huge opportunity for business to business. You just need to go out there and have the conversations.
And also the value isn't always in making money. The value can be in saving them money or saving them time, or there's all sorts of scenarios where in a virtual reality environment you can save all sorts of time, because you're, especially the design world, if you're creating something in VR rather than a big clay model of something, it's going to save you time, it's going to save you money. So there's many different ways that a business can get value from it.
Yeah, okay. So,
I think the ones who will push the industry and who will take the lion's share are not the ones who come out fastest and do something quick and follow the current trends, but it's the ones who look ahead. And it's those companies working in VR that manage to crack some of the key VR questions we're facing at the moment. And we're struggling with a few problems at the moment. Obviously, everybody has realized that there's a motion sickness issue, but do we exactly understand what causes it, at what point, and the details of it? So is there enough research done yet? Another area is just to look at the actual impact VR has on the user. There was a talk yesterday which was touching on how the brain processes VR. And this is a very interesting area because it leads to a lot of potential applications in medical treatments. Think about the whole psychology sector, which hasn't even started exploring the use of VR yet, really, I think. So it challenges all of us to really jump ahead and not think of the VR we have now, but think of the VR we will have, let's say, 5 years down the line, and try to be there and work backwards.
Yeah. So if you look into the future of business applications for VR, what do you think is going to be the standout? Is it going to be something to do with social? Is it something to visualization? What do we think will be like the standout kind of use of VR?
I think it's all of that. I think it will be a range of stuff that some of which we don't even know exists yet. I think it'll be, at the moment the market is too embryonic to say. I think there's low-hanging fruit, training, architect, all the stuff we've talked about. That's where people are seeing the immediate value. But in the longer term, as the market evolves, as people's comprehension of the various nuances of creating content in VR evolves, we don't know. I guess that's part of the reason we're all here and we're so excited about it, is that we don't really know where this is going to go.
Yeah.
We're at the stage now we're kind of limited by our imaginations, and also we are limited by the technology now. But the market now, the tech now, will be very different to how it is in a year, 2, 3 years' time. So both the evolution of desktop VR, of mobile VR, of console VR, all of a sudden you're going to be able to enable experiences that you can't get now. And so when that happens and all sorts of haptics come along and all this other great stuff, who knows what's possible when you put it in the hands of the right people with the right budgets. So.
Yeah.
Well, I think the future of VR is the future we create for it, and that's happening on all fronts. It's happening on hardware development, where continuously there are new ideas about full body suits and I don't know what else. So there's so much happening that I think VR, a few years down the line, will look very different from what we're dealing with today. And so whatever we can imagine, it can become. And that's what I find extremely exciting about it. In our application, not everything is worth putting VR in. In some cases, it's actually more distracting than helpful. Think if you try to train people to solve complex problems, you don't want them to be busy throwing coffee cups around. So to look at where actually does VR add value, where does it have real power, and then create that vision, and then suggest it. And there's so much areas where we have problems. And when we look at the problems, so business problems, medical problems, whatever, when you start working back from the problems and try to build solutions, then there is lots of space where we can claim its space.
So from my perspective, actually, I think the thing that's going to be most interesting in the near future for VR is the point at which we all get out of our bubble. Because right now we're in our lovely bubble of VR, and actually if you go and ask Joe Bloggs on the street, they'll have all heard vaguely of the two letters V and R, but they have no clue what it actually means or what the real potential of this is. And oftentimes most of them won't have worn a headset, or they'll have seen one, but they won't have put it on their own head, or whatever that thing is. What I'm really interested to see is when we reach that tipping point of public awareness and consciousness, and actually it becomes a real, tangible thing in everybody's life to understand exactly what VR is, in the same way we all understand what a mobile phone is. It took us, maybe a decade to get to that point where we all understood what the real application or potential of a smartphone was. It's going to take that kind of amount of time for VR to really have that kind of level of consciousness, generally in the public. And that's when I think things will really get interesting, is when everybody has accessibility to this technology and understands its scope. And therefore, the people who we wouldn't imagine would get involved in this industry, they're the ones who are going to come up with interesting applications for what we do with this technology.
Yeah. So, just out of interest then, do we think that, this is obviously a massive industry, has massive potential. Do you think the government is supporting it enough? Do you think we've got enough support? I mean, I know that we've got a new network called immerseuk.org. Yeah. So, people don't know about that. That was launched last November by the KTN. Yep. So that's something you might want to look at. And I assume they're going to come up with contests. Somebody from the digital. But do you think there's enough support out there? Do people know that there are organisations out there that can support them?
So I'm biased because I'm doing a bit of work for the Catapult, and they're lovely people. Hi guys. No, but genuinely. So the work I'm doing with the Catapult, along with Darren over there, is looking at how the Catapult can support the immersive sector. There's all sorts of stuff that will be announced soon around, that my good friend Victor over there has come up with, that will really help grow the sector. So I think there's a lot that I wish I could talk about more about how the government via the Catapult are trying to help the sector. That will become clear in the next couple of months. But what I would say is that it's very clear that it's got a massive part to play in the digital economy in this country, and it's being taken very seriously how big it can be for the UK. And also, ultimately it's important that the government wants to make the UK the home of VR. It doesn't want LA or New York being the hub of VR. We've got some incredible companies here, incredible creativity. It's in the country's interest to make the UK the home of the immersive economy and make it as big and successful as it can be.
Yeah.
I'm actually going to add to that, just because I know Caroline's in the room somewhere vaguely over there. A survey that was recently carried out by Forward showed, I believe it was 51%, Caroline? Is that what you said? Yeah. 51% of people who are working in the VR industry believe that their company needs to relocate outside of the UK, or that their staff need to be outside of the UK in order to actually be, able to facilitate business. And that's a real, genuine issue that we have in this industry right now, is the perception of this industry. And irrespective of whether or not there is tangibly government support or not, which there is, by the way, huge amount of government support, it's the perception of that support that is the issue. And the fact that people don't know it's there, or don't believe that it's there, is actually the real issue. It's not whether or not there is the support, is making sure that people have the right perception of that support.
Yeah.
Well, and that support isn't always coming straight forward. Our painful experience is that we get funding applications rejected over and over and over, because there is a lot of understanding about VR as a technology, but very little understanding about this field in which we're trying to explore it, which is the application of it for particular things beyond gaming. So that's the bad news. The good news is that when you work business to business, you have a lot of potential partners who do have money. So it makes us a lot less reliant on government support, because you can find powerful partners who are not forcing you to go through the motions of bidding and proposals, but who say, okay, we're willing to take that risk, here's the money, go for it. And that's one reason I think why the business-to-business relationship for VR will be a driving factor.
Yeah. And seeing as I'm on the stage, and I can say this, just so people know, Gateshead Council are building a purpose-built facility up in the northeast, which is going to be a big new busy building that will have amazing facilities, and it'll be open later in the year. If you want to know more about it, try and find me on Twitter, and I'll give you my email address. Anyway, but so let's open this up to the audience. We've got a few minutes left. Does anybody have any observations or questions that they'd like to make? Sorry. Hi.
I'd like to make a question. On your professional experience on B2B, what sort of challenges have you found when trying to move from single turnkey projects to service? Because many times I've come to this situation where some companies who don't really understand the nature of VR and technology and how can that greatly benefit their industry, usually want something contained. And I was just wondering if you have faced that same very thing, so to speak, and what sort of action do you take, and how did you tackle it?
It's a large question.
Yeah, so I've got a couple of clients at the moment that their initial scope was exactly that, was creating a piece of VR that would solve a problem internally. It's something that was quite niche. You're right. Their view was, we'll experiment, but we'll kind of contain the experiment. What's happened with one of those clients is they've realised that the value of investing in that content, it gives them something they can solve more problems with internally, but also they've realised that actually they can create something that they can actually create some IP that they can then use to scale it elsewhere. So they can kind of hedge their investment by virtue of the fact that there's clearer ROI based on other revenue streams that come in from other areas. It's sometimes hard to get them to realise how they can sometimes take what they perceive to be an internal solution actually to being something which is scalable externally. So making them realise that there's a lot you can do with VR to tell a story above and beyond just what you think you can contain internally. So if I'm working with a financial institution that actually the value of the content for them as a marketing, promotional, that whole piece is actually probably greater than the initial benefit they thought it would serve from an internal promotional piece. But that was a hard discussion to have with them because, again, that's a completely different market. It's a different deployment mechanism. It's a different, way of maintaining and iterating and upgrading the content. And it's a lot of, it's a lot of conversations with kind of really the people that are going to have, the key stakeholders that are going to have to maintain and going to have to support that. Because what they're worried about a lot of the time is actually what that content looks like in a year, 2-3 years' time in terms of, is it an investment that's just left and dead, or how do they actually iterate it along with the technology to always have something that's compelling enough to render the initial investment worthwhile, if that makes sense. But it's tricky because there's still not, to Tanya's point, there's still not that detailed understanding of what the tech really means beyond just having a headset on your head and having going underwater or whatever it may be. So a lot of the work I do, it's 95% of it to start with is presentations to, say, C-suite or whatever it may be, to get them to understand what it looks like for them away from being a gaming or marketing show. And it's tough, it is tough.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult, VR, isn't it? And I think a lot of people have touched on this in previous talks and panels. That people have talked about the virgins. But I think if you don't experience the VR experience yourself, it's very difficult to explain. You really need people to have a go and to understand it, I think. And that's the problem. It's, you can't just sit with a piece of paper and say, oh, it'll do this, although you should obviously think about the objectives. You've actually got to let people experience, especially if they haven't had any experience in VR.
So there's two sides to that equation, though. So there are the people who've never tried the VR, and until you put a headset on, they can't really truly get it, and we know that that's a thing. Yeah. But then there is the other flip side of that coin, which is when you're dealing with corporates, they need to be able to see the evidence on paper. Yeah. And so there needs to be that business case story that you're explaining to them before you ever get to building anything or talking budgets. You actually just need to be able to prove that there is an ROI for VR, that there is a purpose to VR before they even get anywhere near putting a headset on their head. You know, it's all well and good putting a headset on their head, but until they understand that business case, you're just showing off a toy to them. You know, that's all you're really doing. So a lot of what companies, that most of the people in this room are probably doing right now, is 90% is education. When you go into meetings, you spend at least 60% of the time in the meeting explaining to them just basic fundamentals, because you need to be on the same page with them, and they need to be on that journey with you as you explain to them the actual pure benefit of doing this stuff. So for me, when I'm dealing with a lot of businesses who, in these kind of scenarios, we have two different statements that we follow. The first is, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And there are, trying to mind my language, there are a crap ton of people who want to make VR right now because it feels like mobile 5 years ago, and it feels like they should have an app. In the same way they feel like they should have VR. They don't understand why, they don't understand necessarily the need for that. They just want to have it because it's a cool thing to have right now, it's a cool toy. But when you say to them, okay, but are you actually making anything back on that? Most of them aren't. They're just spending marketing money, which means that in the long term, somebody's going to turn around and go, well, you spent that money, it didn't make anything, so we're not going to do it again. And they're not having a long-term vision of why they would do VR in the first place, and it's our job to actually say no, rather than say, yes, let's do another piece of VR for you because you're asking for it. It's actually our job as the VR industry experts here to actually push back on these people and say, no, let's think about this first.
Let me just put a thought in there. I think keeping things contained with a new technology is at the core of innovation, of any innovation for business. It's risk management. So that's what they will do, and that's what they've learned to do. You try something, you see how it works, and if it works well, you continue and you expand. So I see that is a challenge initially because, of course, we all have these massive upfront costs to shoulder. But on the other hand, it's also an opportunity, because if you can get them to engage with something small and make it so good and so mouth-watering that they actually follow you to the loot, going, can I have that headset again, please? Then you're in, yeah? And then it doesn't matter that you have to make that first leap and take that push and just, nag a bit. And this first experience has to be absolutely mind-blowing. And if you get that, you got them.
Yeah, okay, all right. Yeah, sorry, question there in the middle. Oh.
I just wanted to ask about, you said that there's a lot of funding available that people don't know. Where's the best place to search for it?
Oh, I don't know whether there's a lot of funding available, but I hope there will be in the future. The best people to talk to are the KTN. Yeah, so KTN. There's Digital Catapult. They're the two organisations, and Innovate UK, that are looking at this area. KTN in particular, they set up immerseuk.org. Any more questions out there? No? Is that it? Well, thank you very much to the panellists who've spent a lot of time and effort preparing and being here today, so thank you very much. I think the takeaway is that there's lots of things happening on the business side. It's not always easy to get in front of the customers by the sounds of it, but hopefully there are organisations out there that are networks that will help you do that. So I wish you all every success. Thank you very much for coming and listening to us today.
Thank you.
And there's one.